Welcome to the Media Fail Awards. We will be honoring, or actually dishonoring, news agencies' biggest blunders, lies, and hypocritical disasters in the past year. We have the website for it, mediafailawards.com. That'll lead you right over to the newsletter where you vote. You will be deciding who, when, what were the absolute worst of the year. The awards are shaped like, well, you'll see in the newsletter. It's so cool. I will personally make sure that executives of the news agencies that win, or lose actually, hear all about it. Your votes are, of course, anonymous, though there's a different way that you can make a public statement if you want. I'll talk about that. In today's episode, I will start talking you through the nominees. I'm going to make my best argument for why each of them should win their category. I'll be sharing clips from previous episodes in which I talked about these and giving you some updates on them. Will it be the network that chose not to fact-check candidates at all at a debate? Will it be a network that ran what it called a fact check, which was the exact opposite of what's true? An analyst for that same network proved it to me on this show. Will it be a leading newspaper that acknowledged to me that it knows it has things wrong that it refuses to correct? Will it be an agency that went after its own anchor for daring to try to do actual journalism? We got a lot to piece through. Let's do this today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. I have a feeling that there are going to be some folks listening to this one from inside news agencies, especially, who have not previously listened to the show. Here's what it's all about. I spent 20 years inside mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN. I became CNN's lead on-air fact checker. I wrote a book about modern fatherhood and modern families, busting all these myths. Through all my years in mainstream media, I saw fundamental problems that prevent news organizations from pulling through on the mission of providing truth at all times. This show exposes those systemic problems. In looking at what news agencies get wrong, I also look at why they're getting things wrong and how they can be fixed. Since this show launched in the spring, we've looked at a lot of examples, many of them brought to me by listeners who say, hey, please fact check this, or did you see this? Some of these come from people inside news agencies. It was not easy narrowing down the nominees, but I went back and looked at which topics have gotten the most feedback, the most attention, and these are generally the most extreme examples of media failures. A couple of big picture things to understand as we go into this. A lot of what I cover has revolved around the big lie of the right and the big lie of the left. Both are used to push anti-democratic forces. So on the right, there was, yes, this idea of the 2020 election being stolen, but it's bigger than that. The big lie of the right is about the great replacement theory, a conspiracy theory used to fuel all kinds of lies. And it's fundamentally anti-Semitic. At the core is this belief about Jewish people somehow trying to bring non-white people into America. Just everything is so disgusting about it. And it leads to violence like January 6, 2021. Meanwhile, the big lie of the left is this false idea of Israel as being some uniquely big, bad, evil thing, which it isn't even remotely. The big lie of the left is used to push terrorism, like the unimaginably evil October 7th, 2023 terrorist massacres in Israel. The mainstream media propagates the big lie of the left. And that gets me to a media note in here. In general on this show, I don't do much with Fox News. I do sometimes run clips. At this point, it should be so clear to everyone that when it comes to domestic politics, Fox is not attempting to do some general coverage. It is known that Fox pushed the big lie of the right. Fox had to admit it due to a legal case. I do, however, include MSNBC in this show for two reasons. One, MSNBC is part of NBC News, which does posit itself as mainstream, even if MSNBC itself does not. But there's also another reason. Mainstream news agencies that present themselves as trying to appeal to people across the political spectrum have called out media on the right for propagating lies. But these mainstream news agencies do not call out those on the left who are propagating the big lie of the left. So on this show, I do. So you will hear MSNBC mentioned in here. I'm also always open to your feedback, and I'll tell you later on in the show how to weigh in with your thoughts. All right, let's dig right in. Category 1, the biggest single fail for a broadcast news agency. And the nominees are CNN for its Biden-Trump debate. After the disastrous debate, so much of the focus was on Biden's demeanor and how he came across. But the bigger scandal should have been that Trump lied nonstop in extreme ways. As I explained in an episode, these debates are like arson for truth. Having journalists even be up there is like having a firefighter stand there while people start fires all over the stage. Here's a clip from my episode about that debate. Just by being there and presenting questions, they give them a false sense of legitimacy. The entire news industry should use its voice to say, since we cannot ensure truth at these things, we will not take part in them. Instead, we will cover them and give you the truth. That's the role of the media. Since the debate, some prominent officials and some journalists have been asking, why didn't the hosts, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, fact check? Well, that virtually never happens in debates. This is how TV news networks have set it up. Here's what's wild, though. There's a Washington Post article with the headline, Why CNN's Debate Moderators Didn't Fact Check the Candidates. In there's this line. It says CNN's political director, David Chalian, left open the possibility of fact-checking, quote, if there is some egregious mistruth put forward, end quote, but the moderators chose not to. What the hell? There were tons of egregious mistruths. Those egregious mistruths included not only stuff about immigrants and allegedly massive numbers of people dying that just were not reality, but Trump even portrayed a doctor who saves lives of infants as some sort of murderer who slaughters newborns. It was unbelievable. And the quote-unquote journalists just sat there. All right, our second nominee in this category is CBS for its post-interview fiasco. There is an author and anti-Semitic hate monger who lies so much about Israel and wrote a book lying about Israel and leaving out tons of basic information. He doesn't even pretend otherwise. His name is Ta-Nehisi Coates. People on the far left worship him and anything he ever says or does, not because of any information he brings to light, but because they like the way he uses words. Anyway, finally, one journalist in one interview actually attempted to engage in journalism by challenging him. That was this guy, Tony Jacopel, on CBS. Here's a clip from my episode about that. The host, Tony, he gets in trouble. On October 7th, CBS executives used their morning meeting to criticize this interview. The Free Press got sound from this. First, there was the head of CBS News, Wendy McMahon, who came on and introduced Adrienne Roark, who is in charge of news gathering. Adrienne Roark then talked about what she called the importance of objectivity and checking bias at the door. And she said this specifically about the interview.
After a review of our coverage, including the interview, it's clear there are times we have not met our editorial standards. Number two, this has been addressed, and it will continue to be in the future. And number three, I want to acknowledge and I want to apologize that it's taken this long.
Unreal. By the way, what do you mean this long? They did that meeting on a Monday. The interview was just a few days earlier. They still have not responded to false things that CBS has said months and years ago. Meanwhile, news agencies, including CBS, actively encourage other people to bring their lived experiences and perspectives to their work. Here's the host of that same show, CBS Mornings, Gayle King. This was in 2020.
As the daughter of a Black man and the mother of a Black man, this is really too much for me today. It feels to me like an open season.
I also explained that a top executive in the company that owns CBS publicly criticized this anchor as well. Then someone else who has a high-ranking position stood by him. The whole thing is a mess. Meanwhile, I try to reach out to corporate executives all the time to tell them how to get the news agencies to do better. And of course, I don't hear back. All right, the third nominee in this category, MSNBC's Lie Fest for a Queen. Joy Reid, a host on MSNBC, is probably the leading propagandist in the media for the big lie of the left. She never misses an opportunity to lie about Israel. This was brought to me by a listener.
Hi, Josh. My name is Barbara, and I am based in Chicago. I absolutely love your podcast. Anyway, I was listening to Joy Reid on MSNBC give an interview with Queen Rania of Jordan. I found there to be a tremendous amount of inaccuracies, and I was hoping you might look at the interview and set the record straight, not only for her audience, but for Joy herself.
There were so many lies in that interview that it took 2 episodes for me to piece through them all. The interview was more than 20 minutes, and there was just so much that's so wrong with it. There was also this, which summarized how easily people in the media engage in hypocrisy.
Joy Reid has spent recent years slamming the whole concept of monarchy and pointing out how awful it is and how dangerous it is.
Of course, it's hardly news that Trump has always had designs on reigning as a monarch with unlimited power rather than serving as a mere president in a democracy. Who's basically running as a monarch. I mean, they used the White House. They used Fort McHenry. They put the family there, and then they threw a Trump sign up over it, and as if they were already royals. Autocracy is appealing to a certain kind of person who wants order and who sees a royal family. I mean, there's been polling showing that certain Republicans are fine with diminishing democracy if they stay in power.
And here's how this interview starts.
Joining me now is Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan. Your Majesty, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Joy. It's a pleasure to be here.
And throughout the entire interview, she didn't mention things like the lack of women's freedom in Jordan, the lack of basic civil rights, the attacks on Israeli women. She didn't bring up U.S. soldiers being killed in Jordan. The fact that Jordan is ignoring an extradition treaty and harboring one of the U.S. most wanted terrorists. Instead, she just sat there while the Queen said crazy things like this.
Children have not been killed at this rate in any other time in history.
What? How does anyone say that with a straight face? And any true journalist who cares about journalism would jump right on that. There's more than 100 armed conflicts going on right now. You don't see images of kids suffering in other wars. So the media takes these images and they say X number of thousand kids have been killed. They're not telling you the truth about any of these being combatants, terrorists. So we don't know the numbers. And we do know that terrorists are included among the numbers of alleged children. Meanwhile, I mentioned Ethiopia, where an estimated 600,000 people have died due to conflict across just 2 years this decade. Tons of them are children. In Syria, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, including in 1 year, more than 100,000, many of them children. And by the way, she said ever, so it would be remiss of me to not mention the Holocaust, in which 1.5 million Jewish children were killed in just a few years.
And the final nominee in this category, back to CNN, this time for its bonkers lie about militaries. This also came to me from a listener.
Hi, Josh. This is Joelle Kaufman from Burlingame, California, and I love They Stand Corrected. It's a highlight of my week every time it comes out because I know I'm going to learn something. You have made me a much more educated consumer of news. When I read CNN's fact-checking of Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress, I was amazed because their fact-checking didn't dispute any of his facts, and their references and claims were minimal and weak.
The alleged fact check was being done by this reporter, Jeremy Diamond. I pointed out that he got tons of things wrong, but there was one so extreme that it even surprised me.
Netanyahu cited the work of a military expert at West Point, John Spencer. He says that even if you go by Hamas's untrustworthy numbers, the ratio of non-combatants to terrorists killed in this war is so low that it is unprecedented in modern warfare. Here's what Jeremy Diamond said.
You talk to any other expert on the conduct of militaries in warfare, including how the United States has carried out its campaigns, and they will all say that Israel has not taken nearly as many precautions as most modern militaries do in warfare in Gaza.
What? That is the exact opposite of what's true.
In that episode, I spoke with a CNN military analyst who proved that what Jeremy Diamond said there was wrong. And of course, I told CNN about it, and of course, they did nothing. How are you all going to decide among these four? Well, you can always go back and learn more. If you go to the newsletter, and there's this shortcut to it right now, mediafailawards.com, you'll see not only all these nominees, but also the episodes in which I told you more about them. So you can take time and consider, and then put in your vote. Coming up, the next category, the biggest single fail for a text news agency. Sponsor the Media Fail Awards. This is cool. I want to send actual physical awards to the winners or losers of this. Yes, they'll probably toss them out, but in that moment, when they're opening it and seeing it, it will register. Executives know about this show, and people inside news agencies have been telling me that there's conversations about it, but we need to do everything we can to reach people. And setting physical awards, well, that takes money and time. So here's what you can do. You can become a founding member of this show. That's a status sent the newsletter that gives you special perks and messages read on the air and all kinds of other things. Each person who joins as a founding member between now and the end of the year, so December 31st, will be covering the cost of a physical award being sent out. And if you want to include a note to the executives of that news outlet, just let me know. I know from my years inside mainstream media that this kind of thing makes a difference. The word awards itself makes everyone's ears perk up. And now that we're doing this, well, it's going to break through. But we need your support. And if you don't want the newsletter, that's okay. You can also support directly. There's a link in the show notes and at my website for that, too. We're back with the Media Fail Awards. Time for Category 2, the biggest single fail for a text news agency. I'm putting it this way because it includes newspapers, websites, wire services, all that. And the nominees are... First up, Washington Post reverses reality. Here's an episode that I did about that.
Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in southern Lebanon, launched yet another rocket into Israel. They've launched thousands. This one hit a soccer field where young Israeli children were playing. They were part of the Druze community. 12 kids were killed. Dozens of people were wounded. Here's what the actress and activist Deborah Messing pointed out on Instagram.
How did the Washington Post report this terror attack on northern Israel? Alongside a photo of the grieving Druze families? Israel hits Lebanon. What? The international media perverted and twisted the story. BBC, AP, Sky News, all of them spread propaganda directly from the Islamic Republic in Iran and showed abhorrent disrespect for the children and their mourning families. This is unconscionable. These poor families are grieving, and then the international media erases their reality? What happened to honest journalism?
Deborah is right to ask that question. Up next, nominee number 2. The LA Times owner creates a mess. As you might recall, there were 2 major newspapers in the news for canceling their editorial board's planned endorsements of Kamala Harris. And this was done at the last minute, and it was clearly out of fear. That is a terrible way to handle news and stand for democracy. But what happened at the LA Times is something that a lot of the media missed. Here is a clip of my episode about that.
Owner Patrick Soon-Shiong spoke to Spectrum News about his decision.
It would just add to the division. And look what's happened to the Twitter feed that's gone a little crazy when we just said, you decide.
That you decide argument is bogus. Of course people decide. But just like with the Washington Post, the LA Times has endorsed in lots of races. And suddenly here, a billionaire owner gets involved. He has done nothing about anti-Israel nonsense in the LA Times. Maybe because there's no powerful figure threatening his mega wealth. But on this, here he is. There's also something else he said. Listen closely to this.
As an owner, I'm on the editorial board.
As an owner, I'm on the editorial board. that might be news to the LA Times itself because they list who the members of their editorial board are, and he's not one of them. His quote is also written out by Spectrum News. So, serious question, does he think he's on the editorial board? Is he? Does the staff know that he thinks he is? I contacted the LA Times for comment on this and have not heard back.
This is the kind of thing that happens when non-journalists own news agencies. They don't understand how things work. It's like if someone who doesn't know what a beverage is owned Coca-Cola, except it can have a far worse impact on the public. Nominee number 3. New York Times refuses to correct. This one might surprise you because the New York Times has done so many things wrong. But to me, this shows so clearly how little news agencies care about getting things right. Here's the deal. Lots of news agencies have been treating Hamas claims of death tolls in Gaza as though they're legitimate. And I did multiple episodes about this. I pieced through an alleged scientific report, and I explained why that report doesn't even make sense. But people who are trying to justify those numbers go searching for other sources. And the New York Times got something big wrong. Listen to this.
Since someone specifically asked about the New York Times, I read a piece there on one specific battle. In their article, they said a group called Air Wars had independently confirmed, and then a specific number of civilians killed. But the Times was wrong. In news, independently confirmed generally means that they themselves can take responsibility for that piece of information because they went and got it. This group, Air Wars, seems to be doing a good job of attempting to count numbers of civilians killed in wars all over the world. But I checked with them, and no, they do not use the word confirmation when it comes to a number. They're looking at different sources that describe civilian deaths, and their sources include Hamas.
And this time, I actually did hear back from the Times stating that even if it's wrong, they're still not going to change it. I have a note here. I'll share part of it with you in the newsletter. It's from Isabella Pauletto, an assistant in the standards department. She wrote, we make every effort to correct errors when they are brought to our attention in a reasonable period of time. After that, I'm afraid our general policy is not to alter them. And then she goes on with what is probably prepared language about how the Times has been around since 1851. We unfortunately have to resign ourselves to the continued existence of some errors in our digital archives. Seriously? I contacted them about this in June, and it was about this ongoing war. It hadn't even been a year. It was a matter of months. Not only that, but they still hyperlink to the report that included that. Other news agencies hyperlink to the report that included that. If you go to that article, you will most likely see advertising on the webpage, which means they are still making money off of that article being up there. It's not like I said, a century ago, you got something wrong. This is about an ongoing war. And all they had to do is add a line saying that they were wrong. But nope. I also pointed out to the Times that they have a reported $2.4 billion in revenue and nearly 6,000 employees. And look, the basics of what a news agency is supposed to do is provide truth. So if something's wrong, correct it. All right, finally, in this category, the Associated Press. Again, there are so many examples that I could point to, but this one is just so blatant. The AP violated its own policies and basic journalistic standards to slam a professor, Shai Davidai, a guy who stands up to anti-Semitism and calls out the media. Here's a clip from my episode about that.
The other day, the AP said this in a headline, and as I read it to you, think about what's missing. Quote, pro-Israel professor at Columbia barred from campus after harassing and intimidating other employees. You know what it does not say in that headline? Alleged or accused. That is the AP stating that he factually did this. That is a direct violation of their own standards. One of their rules says anything in the AP news report that could reasonably be disputed should be attributed. Well, what constitutes harassment and intimidation can be disputed. This stuff should always be attributed in the headline because that is what so many more people see. Who's making that accusation? Also, you need a response in the headline, like so-and-so rejects accusation after so-and-so claims blah, blah, blah. But what a shock, the AP yet again violates its own standards if it's an opportunity to decide that someone fighting against anti-Semitism is the actual aggressor and other people on campus are the victims. I pulled up AP headlines about harassment in other cases, and they did say alleged in the headlines there. I reached out to them for a comment, and I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that I have not heard back.
So there are your 4 nominees for the biggest single fail this year by a text agency. It's time for you to vote. Go to the newsletter. You can find it at joshlebs.com. Just click on newsletter or click on the link in the show notes, or you can go via Media Fail Awards, all one word, .com. I'll be right back. Here are 2 free ways that you can help this show. 1, we need you to rate and review on all the podcast platforms. Just look at whatever app you use on your phone to listen to podcasts. In most cases, you will find that there's a way that you can rate and or review. When you give the show 5 stars, when you write something great about it, you are triggering those algorithms, telling them that people are interested in this and that they should tell other people about it. It also does this funky thing where it gets a sense of the kinds of podcasts that you like to listen to in general, and it's more likely to recommend to people who listen to those other podcasts that they should also check out this one. So, free way to spread the truth there. Also, at just about all times, I am asked to help spread the word on some other great things, like terrific websites or podcasts you should check out, or petitions you might want to sign. Because of a paid sponsorship, when you use my unique links, a little bit of money comes to this show and helps cover the expenses of this show. It's free, it's easy, and it's in the show notes, which means it's probably right there in your hand. Just click for that information, or you can see it in the newsletter. Thank you. All right, so today you heard my rundown of the first 2 categories. Next week, I'll be talking you through the other 2 categories, which will be the worst overall fail of the year for an entire network or an entire news agency in text, you'll see. But you don't need to wait for that to vote. Go to mediafailawards.com or just click on the link in the show notes. That'll take you to the newsletter where you vote. There are also 2 additional questions. What was the biggest beneficiary of media failures this year? And there are 4 choices. They include the Trump Vance campaign and Iran. You'll see what the other 2 are. Also, what was the biggest loser? This one is kind of a leading question because the choices there include democracy, truth, anti-terror efforts, and all of the above. So you can tell which one I'm hoping wins. I'll be sharing thoughts from you and your hopes for what the media might do in the year ahead. Can't wait to hear from you and see how those votes start to shape up. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.